Here she comes, Veronica Ota.
Thank you, Pastor Mark, for that lovely introduction. And I'm really so thankful to everyone for coming out this afternoon and staying after church. It's been a big weekend. It's a long weekend. So I'm especially grateful for you all for taking the time to be here. And I'm excited because I know a lot of you were too busy working during Fall Festival to have the chance to hear this speech. But it really has been an honor to have been given an opportunity to share my opinions, my research on these topics that are so close to my heart. So I do look forward to sharing this presentation with you. Yesterday, my grandfather was 25 years old. He was told to pack his bags, take what he could carry, and report to Santa Anita Racetrack, where he would live in a horse's stall for the next 7 months. Barbed wire fences silently announced the limitations of his freedom. In case my grandfather didn't quite understand what his own country, the United States, was trying to tell him about the color of his off-white skin. Armed guards pointed their guns at him, their barrels following as he walked between guard towers. Months later, my immigrant great-grandparents and their 2 American sons were put on a train to take them to another facility. Sorry. Stop working. So after Santa Anita, they were sent to another facility. For the next 2 years, my family would be incarcerated within these fences at the Roar, Arkansas War Relocation Center, one of America's World War II concentration camps. All in all, some 120,000 people who happened to live on the West Coast and happened to have Japanese ancestry, including both Japanese immigrants and American-born citizens. People of all ages, the elderly, those ill and hospitalized, even orphans who never even knew their parents. All of these thousands of men, women, and children were distrusted simply because they looked like the Pacific enemy. They were treated as criminals, imprisoned against their will, and denied their rights to due process. Yet, during internment, the US government drafted willing Japanese Americans and sent them from camps onto the European battlefields. To this day, the most highly decorated military unit for its size is the segregated Japanese American unit, the 442nd. As the war was ending and Japan was clearly losing, internees were given a train ticket and $25. Most did not have a home to return to, and rumors spread that if they did return to the West Coast, they would be killed. It would take 43 years for the American government to apologize for the racism and war hysteria that led to the imprisonment of Japanese Americans and immigrants during World War II. Yesterday, Mr. Shigemoto was a 15-year-old boy in Hiroshima. The war was not going well for Japan. Most of the country was completely destroyed by US carpet bombing, and most men were dead or dying on battlefields across the Pacific. Students were given responsibilities to protect their communities. Junior high school students, like Mr. Shigemoto, destroyed wooden houses to create strategic fire breaks throughout the city, with the logic that when the Americans inevitably did attack, not everything would catch fire and burn to the ground. On the morning of Monday, August 6th, 1945, student jobs were rotated, and Mr. Shigemoto was sent out of the city into the mountains to scavenge for food. At 8:15 a.m., he used his t-shirt to wipe sweat from his face. He did not see or hear the blast, but the force of the atomic bomb threw him backwards as he felt heat burn across his exposed stomach. The bomb caused a fireball to form over the city with a temperature of over 540,000 degrees Fahrenheit. In an instant, people near the hypocenter turned to ash. Those less than 2 miles away were burned by the flash of the bomb and or were struck by debris, pierced by shards of glass, or trapped under collapsed buildings. Many of these people died instantly or within hours. Some who miraculously survived the blast without a scratch would, within weeks, start losing their hair, bleed from their gums, develop blood spots, and succumb to a completely new and incomprehensible illness they named radiation sickness. Women's reproductive systems were damaged, and many babies exposed to radiation were born with deformities or disabilities. Mr. Shigemoto was far enough away that he survived the initial blast. He avoided the waves of fire that broke out in the hours after the bomb. He witnessed hell on earth, an entire city in flames, burnt to the ground, littered with unrecognizable corpses, and haunted by disfigured individuals moaning for help. 3 days later, all of this was repeated in Nagasaki. In the days, weeks, months, and years that followed, Mr. Shigemoto, along with other survivors of the bomb, would live with the fear of developing radiation sickness or cancer. Further, the stigma of being a hibakusha, a person who experienced the bomb. The stigma endures to this day and has stopped many survivors and descendants from getting jobs or finding marriage partners. And many who survived carried the burden of survivors' guilt for the rest of their lives. My grandfather and Mr. Shigemoto shared these painful stories with me because they did not want them to be forgotten. They did not want history to be erased. They shared their suffering with me and with others in the hopes that the world would listen and change. Today, as a Yonsei, fourth generation Japanese American with ancestors from Hiroshima, I have the responsibility to tell their stories. The original Issei immigrant generation has all passed, as have many of the Nisei Japanese American citizens. Those who endured World War II internment were hesitant to talk about their experiences for many years and for various reasons. The fact that the experience was traumatic, shameful, and difficult to articulate. The hope that their community would be able to move on and forget internment. Many of their children, the Sansei, grew up with limited knowledge or understanding of the experiences of their parents and grandparents. However, many Yonsei, like myself, have been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to learn about Japanese American incarceration from our family members and from civil rights and historical institutions like the Japanese American National Museum, and from efforts to document and record this history by individual crusaders, artists, advocates, and educators. Today, there are new groups of people being targeted by the US government for simply wanting to exist in America. Waves of Latinx migrants from Central and South America, as well as migrants from all over the world, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Europe, they're coming to escape hardship in their home countries, which might include gang violence, guerrilla warfare, sex, drug, and human trafficking, rape, murder, kidnap, child soldier recruitment, extreme poverty, lack of access to food, water, and medical resources, domestic abuse, genocide, apartheid. The list only goes on. It is hard to fathom what this experience must be like, to travel hundreds, even thousands of miles with no certainties, risking your life every second along the way, living on the hope that something better awaits you. These asylum seekers are risking everything because of the hope they have for the United States, this great country that is supposed to be a melting pot, that is supposed to be the leader of the free world, that is supposed to welcome the suffering and dispossessed and offer humanitarian aid, because it is a country built on the creed that everyone is equal and is endowed with the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But today, we have a humanitarian crisis at our border. The overwhelming majority of these destitute yet hopeful migrants are not being granted the safety of asylum. Applying for asylum is a long, arduous, and uncertain process. It takes an average of 6 months to apply. There are 26 pages of information and questions to answer in great detail. There's also a required biometrics appointment and an interview where applicants must bring their own certified translator or lawyer if necessary. In order to apply for affirmative asylum, you have to physically be at the border or be in the US illegally for less than 1 year. So to reiterate, our policy for applying for asylum requires people to come to the border or cross illegally. Waiting at the border is risky and is causing chaos in Mexico as record numbers of migrants are arriving daily. For those who cross the border, whether or not they plan or do apply for asylum, illegal entry is a misdemeanor, and if convicted, it is grounds for deportation. Now, it's important to note that the Obama administration deported hundreds and thousands of illegal immigrants. There were also some instances of families being separated during Obama's presidency. Many of the policies and laws are the same today. However, there has been one major change that has resulted in one of the most horrific aspects of the immigration crisis today. Obama prioritized the prosecution and deportation of serious criminals and national security threats. He also discouraged the prosecution of immigrants with family and community ties. And he created DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The Trump administration has stopped prioritizing who is deported and who can stay. Instead, the zero tolerance policy that was officially announced in April of 2018 said that any adult who crosses the border should be prosecuted for the crime. While this can be seen as a straightforward interpretation of law, where all who illegally enter are held equally culpable, it is clearly not an equitable way to address the border crisis, as this policy is indirectly responsible for separating thousands of children from their parents and guardians. If parents are charged with illegal crossing, their children can be lawfully taken from them. This is what has happened and is happening to countless families. The number of children separated is not even certain. When Trump announced the zero tolerance plan in April of 2018, just in April and May alone, over 2,000 immigrant children were separated from their families. However, records dating before April of 2018 are inconclusive. By June, a federal judge in San Diego ordered the families to be reunited and directed the federal government to halt separations. The Office of Refugee Resettlement said it could take up to 2 years to reunite families because they will have to manually review records from a database of about 47,000 children. Thankfully, public outrage against family separation played an important part in helping stop separations and expedite the reunification process. While the cruel policy of separating children from their parents was hoped to deter migrants from arriving at the border, it seemed to have little effect. The number of migrants being forced into detention centers across the country continues to grow. These facilities are not equipped to handle this many people, and they are not formally set up to accept donations from the public, despite a reported lack of toothbrushes, diapers, women's sanitary items, clothing, shoes, water, and food. Senator Ted Cruz wrote to Homeland Security, urging them to establish and publicize a process for accepting donations to aid individuals in custody. Currently, they are still turning away most donations as there is no legal protocol to accept outside offerings. I must also note that over 60% of the people who are being held in migrant detention centers are being held in privately ran facilities. ICE has contracted out over $600 million to these institutions just in 2017. California recently took a stand by banning private prisons, and in doing so, will close down 4 migrant detention facilities. No matter where you fall on the issue of private prisons or immigration policy, I think we can agree that these facilities are not ideal. The Office of the Inspector General reported that adults were held in standing room only conditions for a week, and most had not showered in up to a month. Another report from El Paso Norte observed detainees standing on the toilets in the cells to make room and gain breathing space. A doctor who visited facilities in Clint and McAllen, Texas, stated in court, the conditions could be compared to torture facilities. Extreme temperatures, lights on 24 hours, no adequate access to medical care, sanitation, water, or food. The former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics noted, children are experiencing trauma that will stay with them for a long time and from which they may never fully recover. Migrant detention and World War II camps are not the same. I need to point this out because this is the major criticism I've encountered while speaking out against migrant detention and inhumane immigration policies. I grew up hearing my grandfather's stories of being behind barbed wire fences. And so when I see pictures of men, women, and children behind barbed wire fences again, it evokes a deep sense of injustice that is rooted in my understanding of what my grandfather endured. I am angry that my country is forcing people into awful conditions just because they're here and they're from somewhere else. I have to say something because this country wrongfully imprisoned my own family, and they would have taken me to camp if I had been alive in 1942. Again, these are not the same issues, but I can't help but see a frightening parallel between the two. Some argue the real injustice of World War II incarceration was that the US government put American-born citizens in camps, while today's immigration crisis deals with illegal aliens. This is an important distinction to make. However, I respectfully challenge those with this view to consider the plight of the Issei Japanese immigrants who were interned in camps. They were not citizens. Some even wanted to return home to Japan someday. But many would have sought citizenship if it was available to them at the time. However, until 1952, only white and Black people could become naturalized citizens. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 got rid of race-based immigration policies, allowing my great-grandmother, Sayoko, to become a proud U.S. citizen. But for many years, the Issei immigrants did not have a clear path to citizenship. They were stuck in limbo, living in America with American children in a country that not only refused them based on their yellow skin, but also incarcerated them for 3 years because of this heritage. So I wonder, how many illegal immigrants are in a similar situation right now? It is incredibly difficult to become a citizen, despite an earnest desire to work hard, raise a family, and contribute to the United States. And the fear of outing yourself as an illegal stops so many from even considering this as an option. Today, people of Latino descent are being targeted simply because they are the newest group to come to the US in large numbers. The shooting in El Paso illustrates the fatal reality of an unbridled hate and fear of an immigrant invasion. The man who killed innocent people while they shopped at Walmart did not care if he was shooting citizens or illegal immigrants or migrants seeking asylum. He shot to kill brown-skinned people. The racism against Hispanics stems from the same racism, ignorance, and hatred that resulted in my family being put in camps. The situations are different and unique to themselves, but the root racism that is manifested in the concentration camps of World War II and of today, that racism is unfortunately age-old and ever-present. That is the same racism that killed off the majority of the indigenous population in America. It's the same racism that dehumanized African slaves and called them property. It's the same racism causing Islamophobia and the Muslim travel ban. It's the same racism that allowed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. It's the same racism that sent over 6 million Jews to die in death camps and provokes anti-Semitism to this day. And it's the same racism that is motivating a new generation of white nationalists to join together. And I'd argue that that racism stems from a similar hatred and fear of the other that has resulted in the rise in hate crimes against the LGBTQ community. So with all of this going on, with so much division, anger, and despair, we often neglect to discuss the real and rising threat of nuclear warfare. Despite steps taken to reduce the nuclear arsenal after the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty of 1987, and in spite of the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, the US and many other countries are reinvesting in nuclear weaponry at this very moment. North Korea and Iran also seem to be working to establish themselves as nuclear powers. Nuclear weapons do not target military operations. They indiscriminately kill unimaginable numbers of people. They do incomprehensible damage to the landscape and have irreparable effects on our entire planet's environment. With our nation and our world in this state, and with climate change threatening ecosystems around the planet, how can we even function? Although I myself often feel overwhelmed by the reality of today, I have a hope for forever. My hope is for radical solidarity in which all humans can come together and agree on one basic fact, that life is sacred. Sacred can mean holy in a spiritual or religious sense, but it also means something that is deserving of respect, something that is valued and important. The Abrahamic traditions like Judaism, Islam, Christianity believe that life is a sacred gift that is given to us by a heavenly creator. Buddhism and Hinduism revere the sacred nature of life by promoting peaceful, nonviolent ways of living. In the secular world, governments throughout the ages have created laws to protect lives and criminalize murder, the theft of sacred life. Because life is sacred, the golden rule, treating others as you want to be treated, is at the heart of all spiritual traditions as well as the framework for the governance of all nations. The fact that life is sacred is a universal truth. The sacred character of life is filled with both joy and sorrow, satisfaction and disappointment, and life and death. All humans encounter and contemplate these experiences and must find ways to process them in order to live our lives. Although the nature of our experiences can be defined in these dualistic terms, good and bad, seeing life through the lens of these divided terms is unhealthy and unproductive. When we evaluate, measure, and subjectively judge things as good versus bad, we are denying the sacred character of life. Because when it's a battle between left and right, we define migrants as innocent, suffering seekers of asylum, or as consciously law-breaking criminals. But without considering both aspects, how can we protect the dignity of these people's lives, but also uphold the law and order that our nation relies upon to function as a country worth seeking asylum in? When we champion our own righteousness and harbor fear of the other, we see nuclear warfare as some sort of chess game rather than the prospect of wide-scale murder and irreparable ecological damage. At the same time, we must approach the issue strategically and be willing to show our cards to the other side if we want them to trust us and mutually agree to a tie where we may lose the upper hand but save all of mankind. When we pay attention to division, we don't acknowledge the shared joy and sorrow that we all experience. Joy and sorrow are not always separate entities. There is beauty in sorrow, just as there is disappointment in triumph. So what if we stop living our lives according to the divisions of good versus bad? What if we stop avoiding things that make us sad or uncomfortable? And what if we learn to embrace sorrow? We are often brought together most strongly in the toughest of times. The amazing legacy of the Japanese-American internment was that people somehow persevered and made the best of a horrible situation by playing baseball and holding dances and spending years later fighting for recognition and redress. And what of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? If you've ever been to these cities, they are beautiful, modern metropolises. The resilience of survivors was sown into the soil of these cities, and they were resurrected as lasting testimonies to world peace. Should it take catastrophe to unite us? No. But there are catastrophes going on constantly all over the planet, causing people, animals, and the natural world to suffer greatly. In reality, we are all hurting, and much of our pain is caused by the violent hands of man. It is witnessed by the eyes of our neighbor, it is heard by the ears of our brothers and sisters, but it is willfully ignored by all. But what if we stop this pattern by opening our eyes and ears and extending our hands out to all who are hurting. When we reach out to those who are suffering, it's an act of love and it is an exercise of compassion. We are recognizing their suffering and validating the sacredness of their life. Empathy is the quality that allows us to understand the feelings of others, while compassion is how we show that concern for others. And solidarity is the choice to stand with someone in the midst of sorrow, joy, reality. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously wrote from Birmingham jail, "The time is always ripe to do right." The time for change is now. Violence and hatred have been promoted, rationalized, and permitted by mankind in many past yesterdays, and they continue today, but they do not need to exist forever. Here's how we can act now and make a peaceful forever possible. We must see between party lines, beyond arbitrary borders of nations, past color of skin tone, and beyond any imaginable division that exists in our minds. We must stand in solidarity with all those who are suffering and work together to find peaceful solutions to the violent injustices that are being carried out around the world. So I hope this isn't just lip service or food for thought. It's a call to action. So today I invite you to take a look at some of the information we have on this table. I invite you to open yourselves up to discussion, whether it be as a group or with your friends and family, or maybe in the weeks to come. But today you can also learn about Border Angels, which is a group out of San Diego that advocates for humane immigration reform. They provide free legal service and they deliver water, clothes, and food along the border. I'm very thankful that our deacons here at First Presbyterian Church are going to make a gift donation to Border Angels, and I will be sharing information with the congregation about if you feel moved to make a donation, or they have a registry on Target and maybe Walmart or another store where you can buy food items, school items, different health sanitary items, and this group actually drives them into Tijuana to deliver them to folks who are stuck at the border. We're also, I'm sending a petition to Pasadena Mayor Tornick to join Mayors for Peace, which is an international coalition calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons. So there is a petition there that you can feel free to sign. And just since Fall Festival, I'm actually speaking to some folks in different community organizations, and we're trying to organize a peace celebration for Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day in August. And we hope that Mayor Tornick might unveil that he's joining Mayors for Peace at that time. But I'd love to have your signature just to express your support of Mayors for Peace. There's also some information about visiting the Japanese American National Museum, who just yesterday opened an exhibit on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that's going all the way until June of next year. And I might like to try to organize a group trip for SOS and send it out to church community, anybody who might be interested. It's a very moving exhibition. And finally, speaking of SOS, I'm starting a new spiritual community group, and it's called the Spirit of Solidarity, or SOS. Oops, we were already on SOS. It's a non-denominational group that's open to people of all faiths, backgrounds, and identities. SOS is founded on the truth that all life in this universe is sacred, and our mission is to make peace a reality here on this planet now and forever. We will work with groups that uphold the dignity of life and advocate for underserved communities. This presentation is just a taste of what we have planned and what we hope to accomplish. So if you're interested in righting yesterday's wrongs, addressing the issues of today, and working for a peaceful future for our planet through education, activism, and self-reflection, then I really hope you might sign up for our Spirit of Solidarity email list or stay for our meeting, which will be following today's presentation. We might start around 2:30, so maybe you have time to go home, or we'll keep you in the loop for next time. I know it's been a long day for many of us, but I hope you might be interested in learning more. Feel free, there's a lot of materials. The newsletter, we have extra copies of the newsletter. I'm sending those out every month, and you might be interested in reading more about the group. And if you could leave the meeting materials, that would be great for a meeting later. But I'm so open and excited to share everything. I've been speaking with Pastor Mark, who's also been helping me in founding this group. So to end, Richard Rohr wrote, "Either you love everything or there is reason to doubt that you love anything. We must stand together to uphold the dignity of sacred life on this planet. That is radical solidarity. That is the hope for forever." Thank you.